Welcome to the digital lecture series of FU West, the European Studies program of Freie Universität Berlin. In 15 sessions, we will offer you a broad overview of FU West's academic course offerings. You can choose from 12 subject course lectures representing a wide range of disciplines and 3 live sessions on German language and culture. Our series is divided into 4 themes relevant to European studies in Berlin and Germany today. Each will be dealt with by a group of FU West instructors from the perspectives of their particular disciplines or German language levels. Part 3 tackles pressing questions of the future and analyzes concepts and answers provided by European and German political actors, entrepreneurs, media experts, and philosophers. Join our instructors in their exploration of plans and challenges for a better tomorrow. All sessions will offer you insights into our instructors' semester-long regular courses within the FUBEST program and the way in which they integrate Berlin as a cultural and historical location. We hope you enjoy the online program we have assembled for you. For more details about the lecture series and the regular on-site FUBEST program, visit our website later. You will also find additional information at the end of today's lecture. With that, enjoy the following session and see you soon in Berlin.
Hello from Berlin. I'm Tom O'Donnell, Dr. Tom O'Donnell, and here at FU Best in Berlin, I teach a course called Energizing Europe, 21st Century Renewable and Fossil Transformations. And I'm going to give you an overview of the course. I'm not going to actually teach you the things. There'll be a few teasers where I'll say, isn't this interesting, sort of thing, show some data and some developments in this field, and hopefully spark your interest that you might want to register and take the course. And then we can say, Willkommen in Berlin, welcome to Berlin, okay, in the near future. So if you're interested to find out a little bit more about me, you'll see down below on this page, there's a couple, there's a blurb here, a bio blurb, but there's a couple links. You can go to those links and see my academic work and my other work at the blog. There's a lot of my writing. And feel free to write me an email if you like. My email is going to be at the last slide, okay? So let's get going. This course, it's the issue of global warming and carbon emissions that, of course, motivates a course like this, interest in these issues. Germany here, where I'm speaking from, is seen by many, it's actually represented by the German government as well, as being a world leader in fighting climate change and reducing carbon emissions. Now, you'll see I point out here in this slide that inside Europe, inside Germany, of course, it's more complex. It's a very difficult struggle to accomplish this. You'll hear oftentimes that many people will say who are very pro-environment, technology is not the problem, the money is not the problem, we know how to do everything, it's just a matter of political will. There's been a lot of talk in the last year or two about setting higher goals, which may be a great idea or may not, depends. And saying that the problem is only political will. One thing I think you'll hopefully, if you take this course, come away with from my course, is that this is a complicated problem. We are going to learn something historically. We're going to go back and look at the history of what is commonly called today energy transitions, going back to agrarian society briefly, first industrial revolution, second industrial revolution, and the current third industrial revolution, and see how this took place. Was it energy revolutions, energy transitions that then drove industrial revolutions? Or was it usually an industrial revolution that in the course of it revolutionized a lot of things, the way people do a lot of things, produce things, and also created a situation where new energy could be developed and used? Which direction does it go? Because there's a big debate right now, and there has been, about how it's going to work in this transition we're trying to go through away from carbon, away from fossil fuels and carbon emissions to defeat global warming. So you'll see here, but there's other issues that come up here in Europe, and costs are quite high, both for citizens and for business. New wind energy impacts the public. A lot of people don't like the noise. They don't want it close to their house. Even people who are very strongly supporters of green politics have said, well, maybe there's a problem with installing too much wind. Environmental damage or just the view of nature. Most German citizens, and I'd say it depends on the country in Europe, but are in general, though, are very pro Energiewende. The Energiewende is German, roughly for energy transition. It's the national energy transition plan that's been in place now for well over a decade. So, there's been bumps on the road. Some are pretty major bumps. And the question here that we're going to grapple with in this course, that I grapple with in this course with my students, will the EU, and Germany in particular, because we're here in Germany, learn from these mistakes and make corrections and go forward, or will it get stuck somewhere along the way? And if a country like Germany gets stuck, other countries who didn't have as much ambition, who aren't as rich as Germany, don't have the same high-tech industrial base. Unfortunately, the idea might be that, well, if Germany can't do it, or has such trouble doing it, how could we do it? So it's very important that this works, and also for the European Union as a whole. Right? So, now this course has 3 parts. The first part is really one session. I'll give you an overview of it. And it really is sort of like what every citizen of whatever country, what every citizen of the world should know about energy in the world. How much, where it is, and so forth. I'll get to that in a moment. I'll give you a brief overview. Number 2, we're going to spend, almost a half of the course, a little less than half the course, on going through these previous industrial revolutions and seeing the relationship between them and energy transitions, and having some appreciation for what it means to have an energy transition, and what it takes, what it's taken historically, and how long it's taken historically. And with that in our pocket, with that sort of as our resource base, as our information basis, then we come back and look at today's energy transition in Europe, and most particularly in Germany, and we do some comparative work with the US especially, but with other countries, but it's mainly focused on Germany. So from the perspective of the past, what we learn about the past, we get some expertise in stepping back and examining these questions, and then look at the current transitions, okay? And we'll go through the origins of the transition and so forth, okay? So here you can stop the slide if you want and go back and look at, this is just an outline of the syllabus. Number 1 is the energy facts and data. And now everything labeled Energiewende 1, and then on the next page, Energiewende 2, 3, 4, is about the transition in Germany, comparing it to other places, the history and problems. The part about Energy System 1, Energy System 2, Energy System 3, you see here. And if I continue on to the next page, the second half of the semester, after the midterm, you can see that continues on, Energiewende 2, 3, and 4, 5, and 6. It's different aspects of the energy transition are looked at in some detail. And that includes also the roles of fossil fuel, especially natural gas, which continues and will continue for a long time as mating it, I would say, with renewables, with wind and with solar that are not regular, that vary with the weather during the day. And the one thing that can be used well to balance it is natural gas, which is lower carbon than coal. It's not no carbon like nuclear. But anyway, that plays a big role in Europe and in Germany and in the US as well. Okay, so let's start here. We're going to start with this. I wouldn't say you're going to, obviously you're not going to learn it. Each one of these is a whole course, okay? But it's a little bit to whet your appetite or get your interest. If you want, I really recommend, if something strikes you as interesting or very insightful, that might happen. But if something strikes you as, what's he talking about? Just stop the video, take a look, and in many cases, I have the references. There's a link you can click. You won't be able to click it here in the video, but you could search on, I would search on Google for what I'm talking about and the data I'm showing you and learn a little more, okay? So, energy facts and data. This is the background any citizen should know, okay? And I'll give you a little bit of this. So, What are the world's energy resources? Where are they? How much? Are they conventional, non-conventional? How much CO2 do they give out? Do they release each one, and so forth? Okay. So here's a sample from the first day's class. Okay, the first readings. Roughly, this shows the balance between primary resources that are out there in the ground that are available. You might be surprised. Uranium-238 can be converted into 235 and put into a reactor. So, people sometimes are surprised to see how much more energy is available in the world. And look how much coal is available underground as compared to gas and oil. Conventional oil is a bit more than that. Now this slide is a little different. Let me go back. This is the resources that are out there that are possible to get to under certain circumstances, okay? What do we use every year? Here's the balance between them. You should look at it as a balance between them. Roughly, this has changed somewhat over the last years, but this is roughly right. You can see solar, wind, and geothermal, biomass. These are things, and hydro, are things that are considered renewable. Now, let me just say, biomass is not necessarily renewable. It depends what we're burning, right, and how you're burning it. And in a lot of places in the world, it actually reflects a lot of pollution and damage to the environment and to people's health. So it depends. But anyway, these are the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things there are usually considered the renewables. And then coal, gas, and oil are the things that produce the fossil fuels. So you see, even though, let's go back, the amount of oil out there in the world is much less than coal or uranium, what's actually out there, what we use in a year is mainly oil. Oil is close to half of all the energy used in the world. Okay, that's interesting. That's a major challenge, and you can see coal and gas too. Just to point out, a lot of what's consumed doesn't go to anything useful per se. This is basically a law of physics that this happens, and then engineering comes into play. But there's a lot of losses. A lot just is heat that goes up the smokestack or heats up the engine or whatever, or the light bulb, and is wasted. Right? Now, I'm not going to go through this now, but this is basically, this is a flow chart. Okay, and this is the kind of thing we want to understand before we start doing deeper analysis. On the left, relative to each other, that's the resources that are out there underground when we're talking about fossil fuels. Okay, coal, uranium is not a fossil fuel, it's nuclear, but coal, natural gas, and oil. Of those, you see those circles that are there now, that's the percentage of each one that's actually been used so far. So anyway, there's a lot of it out there, and we've only used a small amount of each one. Okay, well, oil maybe somewhat more, but there's a lot more oil that's been recently discovered in the last few years. Here's the losses. When you use that, here's the amount that kind of goes up the stack, right? That's wasted in heat, that's not useful for the process you're doing. In between all that complexity is the processing of the energy, and here it ends up on the right. The top is losses. The second one is what goes into buildings. The third one is what goes into industry, industrial processes, and the bottom one is what goes into transport. Now, just to give you an example, you see that orange going to transport down below? That's oil. Almost 95%, 94% of almost every country in the world, all the transport is based on oil. And that's the same in Germany, US. US, it's 95 or so, 94 in Germany. So that's the same everywhere. That transition to electric cars or whatever hasn't taken place. It's got a long way to go, unfortunately. And you can see in other things how it goes, all right? So that's the kind of stuff we want you to have some feel of. I want you to have some kind of feel of as we go forward. So, you know how to judge things. How much is, now I'm going to, here's a good example. How's it going now? How much energy is produced from carbon sources that contributes to global warming? And how much is carbon free? How much is green? How much is nuclear? This is all the IEA states, and that basically means more or less the first world, okay? With some exceptions. Mexico is also there. Turkey is there. But it's basically the first world countries, very heavily Europe, the United States, North America, Australia, okay, Japan. And what I want to show you here, this is the line. You see that line? I'll do it again. That's the line. Roughly on the right is what we call green or green. There's not all renewables. It's also nuclear. But things that don't produce very much, aren't supposed to produce net gain in carbon. If it's renewables, that's burned. It's supposed to be absorbed by trees and grass and fields again and burned again and gone around. So that's why they put biomass on that side, okay? That's questionable as to whether you should be able to do that, but that's over on that side. Now let's do it again. On the left, the red, this is all the energy a country uses. The red is oil. You can see oil from transport. Half of all that oil is for transport, automobiles, planes, and the rest of it is for industrial processes, plastics, medicines, and so forth. You'll see in there that on the left of the line, the blue, and that's natural gas. I guess you'd call that blue, okay? And there's a fair amount of coal in there. That's the dark brown, all right? Now on the right, it's kind of interesting. All that yellow on the right that's not producing carbon, that's nuclear in use in the world today, nuclear power. Hydro is blue on the right, dark blue. Light blue is the wind. And you can see there's not a lot of wind yet. I mean, it's there, but, and then solar is even less. Solar is the orange on the dark orange on the right. And then there's some geothermal, at least in some countries. There we got New Zealand with quite a bit of it, all right? So fossil on the left, see that? Low or no carbon on the right. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pick out the countries that make more than the average developed country, okay? The OECD, we call it. So on average, they make above average per capita GDP, okay? And I picked them out on the left, and I just want to show you something here. It's how they group together on the question of fossil versus low carbon. You see down here we got Finland, Sweden, New Zealand, Norway. They're doing pretty well. For the total energy used, they are, almost 50%. Well, it's less than 50, better than 40%. I'm sorry, I'm reading it backwards. How should I say? Better than 40% of what they do is fossil fuels, emits carbon, but largely the rest is low or no carbon. Now you come up here, and this is interesting. You see Germany is there, which has this reputation of being so far ahead in fighting climate change by reducing its carbon footprint. But look, within these countries, it's basically just grouped with the United States, United Kingdom. There's very little difference between the three countries. And I think you might find that very interesting. That's an interesting thing we look into in the class. And at the top up here, the countries that are really doing about the worst, they got about 10 to 15% of non-carbon sources. Everything else is carbon emissions, and that's Australia, Netherlands, Japan, Luxembourg, Ireland. Ireland's doing better lately, but yeah, okay. So there we go. You see the groups. All right. Now, all that red there, half of that goes to transport and industrial processes. So let's get rid of that. Let's just look at electricity production, because the reality is most of the energy transition in the world today, it's really about producing low carbon energy. There's not much of a dent that's been made in transport or anything. So let's just look at that. Okay, here again is my line. See it? That is the line between fossil fuels on the left. The light blue is natural gas. The dark brown is coal, and the red is oil. You don't use very much oil, countries, to produce electricity. So it's mainly natural gas and coal, and that's where the carbon emissions come from in electricity supplies, okay, in these more advanced or more developed countries of the world, economically advanced. On the right, what we have, and that's the 50%, okay? So if you're this line, right? If you're on the left, you produce more than 50% of your energy, the countries at the bottom, without fossil fuels. The ones on the top use fossil fuels for over 50%, all right, to give you an idea. And here again, they group, as we saw before, France down there. You can see it's got a huge yellow bar, and that's nuclear energy, just like Switzerland, Sweden, Finland, somewhat Canada, and you go up a little bit, Hungary, Belgium. Lots of nuclear power that's zero carbon, and that's how they're doing it. The deep blue, right, is hydro, and that's, you're lucky if you've got it, right? And on the right-hand side, far right, the dark orange is solar. And there's a little geothermal, and the light, can you see the light blue, some countries like Denmark there, see it? Luxembourg, I'll give you some time to find it there, or I can show you a bit here. Denmark and Luxembourg, you can see here, they got a lot of wind. This light stuff is wind, and the dark stuff, dark blue, is hydro, okay? And here, the deep dark, I should say, orange is solar, and so forth, all right? So that gives you an idea. So nuclear and hydro are playing a very big role, but some countries like France at the bottom, their DE is Germany, Deutschland, and the United States are about in the middle, about the same, although Germany plans to completely eliminate its nuclear, and that's a challenge to stay low fossil, and Poland's at the top, where they use a lot of coal. They plan to go to nuclear quite strongly over the next 10 or 20 years, okay? So that's the situation we have, just a rough overview to give you an idea where things are at. Yeah, here's some trends. I'll let you read it yourself. This is things you'll come to know very well and in this course, and from this knowledge be able to judge different plans and strategies of different countries around the world, hopefully. So, back to the syllabus. Now I'm going to give you a quick overview here of energy systems, which I mean, you can see traditional organic society. That's the first course, the first week that we're going to be on dealing with that. Then another week will be the first industrial revolution, then the second industrial revolution, and the third. And with each one of these, there is characteristic use of energy and new innovations. There was an energy transition that followed, in each case, the Industrial Revolution. It lagged by quite a period of time. The Industrial Revolution presented a problem of the new way of doing things, the new way of transport, the new way of production especially, demanded new energy sources, and new energy sources were found and invented and integrated, and then that particular Industrial Revolution takes off. All right, and that's something we're going to learn in here, and how long it takes, and how complicated it is. So look, this is a book we'll use for some, especially for this traditional society, agricultural society. It's quite interesting study. But anyway, look, here's an example of some stuff. I think this is amazing. If you look down the right column, kilograms per hectare, okay, right here. You might not have a lot of fertile land in, say, China, Taiwan, but the land you did have in the 16th century we're talking about, a long time ago, in agricultural society before any industrial revolution, in Vietnam, Mexico, Southeast Asia, these warm places, there were places that produced, look, 2,500 kilograms, 2,500 kilograms of rice per hectare. And you come down here and you look at Europe, and down, that's 5 or 6 times what you could produce per hectare in Europe with a different kind of farming. It's called dry farming. They rely on rain and so forth, okay? But Europe had a lot more arable land, a lot more land that could be farmed. So it's less productive, but there's a lot more. So what happens? A lot more land. Well, you can't really farm it by hand, right? So what happens is, look, 25%, this is 1800, but before that, it was, for quite a while, it was similar. almost a quarter of the food, the agricultural production, of the energy production in those days in Europe went to fodder. That is to say, feeding horses and oxen that did labor and magnified the labor of the humans. All right, and this is quite interesting. Something that occurred in Europe that there was some of it in other places, but it really became a big deal from the Middle Ages in Europe. 1 or 2% always was windmills and water mills. And it turns out that that's very important, even though it's a small percentage, okay? So, well, you can see things that we can find differences between countries. Here's how many horses per worker. I've already mentioned why that's important in Europe. In order to, it's very unproductive land compared to the rest of the world, but you can farm a lot of it. And horses help. And look at England, that intersection there. Twice as many horses per worker as the Netherlands, and 2 or 3 times as many as Germany, and so forth. 15 times or so as many as Italy. So there's a difference between even the European countries, and that's interesting because it's England that ends up making the Industrial Revolution. Right? This is a problem with forests in Europe. We'll talk about this. If you're interested, take a look at this. This is just a nice picture of a big 1600s, 17th century water mill. And I'll show you, before I do that, this is what's interesting about water and wind in those days. That was the way you could get horsepower. Look, one water mill was 3 horsepower, each water mill. But look, that's 6 animals. That's 60 people. One water mill, 3 horsepower, it takes 60 people to apply that force over a distance, right? So that's why that 1 or 2% was very important in Europe, and in the beginnings later of the Industrial Revolution, they have that power to use them. Okay. Here's a typical windmill from the 1600s, the 16th century. Anyway. So, moving on here, the first Industrial Revolution. This is something we're going to look at because people are saying that the invention of a new energy source, well, it's not really a new energy source, is it? If we start putting in renewables everywhere in the sense of wind and solar. Solar is new. That is something new that was developed in the 1970s, that solar voltaic, okay, electricity from solar. But windmills, or water mills, it's mainly windmills in the energy transitions of the world that Germany, for example, advocates and is committed to. And, of course, that's an old source of energy. They're modern ones, but an old source. The idea many people have is they look back and they say, the steam engine, as it says there. The invention of the steam engine is what brought the Industrial Revolution. So the invention of new renewable sources, of new sources of energy will make another industrial revolution. But did it really go that way? And will it really go that way? Well, will renewable energy bring about a 4th industrial revolution? There's many people who say this is the case. So this is a question we're going to interrogate because it has to do with what policy you adopt and what comes first, the chicken or the egg, in solving the problem of carbon emissions and global warming, in my opinion. Okay. So the class in that might have 3 big ideas. I'll just put them up here quick. I won't dwell on it. What was the first Industrial Revolution compared to what happened in the Industrial Revolution? Why did it take place? Why did it take place in England first? A long time before a number of other countries. The United States came sometime later, just after our revolution, 1820s, 10s, 20s. And then a bit later started Germany and so forth. So it lagged a fair amount. What caused it? And then what effect do these industrial revolutions have on society, which includes the energy, but it has a lot of others, lots of social, political, economic effects, including energy. And the matrix of how they're related is something we'll get into. I just want to point out that these changes historically have taken place pretty slowly. There's no question, if you look down at the bottom here, electricity made from natural gas. Seems like something that would take off pretty quick. From the inception to the pretty full deployment took 125 years. Well, from candles, a transition from candles as light in houses to kerosene lamps, which really allowed the expansion of lighting in houses in the late 18th or early 19th century. Well, that took about 50 years, and you go back, okay? So railways with combustion engine railways, okay? That took 74 years, but some of the older transitions took much longer. So this is also learning how are we going to make this transition people would like to make in 20 or 30 years, changing the entire energy system, not just one piece of it. That's a bit of a challenge, and it's good to realize what we're up against. Let's take the next industrial revolution. Well, actually, this is the second industrial revolution, and I'm not going to get into it now, but we find that it breaks down in steps. Mass production, when electricity came in, okay? Sort of together from the 1880s, the introduction of electricity in a massive way revolutionized the transmission of energy, the production and transmission of energy. But also in the second industrial revolution a little later, of course, came the automobile and gasoline and oil. You know, oil had been used for other things before, but it took off massively. So the second industrial revolution, if the first industrial revolution produced the steam engine, which was clearly revolutionary, based on coal, the second one added to this, based on oil, based on oil, electricity, electrification, and transport vehicles off the railroad without a steam engine, cars and trucks, ships. Okay, and these did not bring the revolution; they're a product of the revolution. That's what I want to say. The information revolution or electronic revolution is the third one, and the first phase is when computers weren't in your house. These were when up till 1970 or 80. Before that, they were brought into and married with machines and factories, with ships, with locomotives and the railways, and revolutionized the control and processing of information in production and transport, okay, and communicate. But it wasn't personalized, and this made quite an advance in technology for production. But later on, surprising to many people, it became individual, as you know, individual computers, individual devices. I have my smartphone, right? Individual devices that became, you could say, married with second industrial revolution technology such as telephones, okay, and televisions and so forth to produce the internet and smartphones and so forth, and personal computing. So this has been what I think we'll find here, and I'll just, you could say solar comes with this, sort of at just after the second industrial revolution, beginning of the third. Solar is a new energy source, but there are really no new energy sources in this period. Even nuclear came from the second industrial revolution, okay, before the 1970s. So there really isn't this revolution, which we know so much about, we live every day. It's been going for 50 years, right? Yeah, 50 years since the 1970s, at least. Has still not produced really a new source, revolutionary source of energy. Will it? We'll see. Okay, we're talking about transitions being made by application of old sources, right? Aside from solar, it's wind, nuclear, or whatever, right? Geothermal. So, this is about, take a look at this. This is some of the social changes. The vertical axis here on the left roughly shows how far developed countries went in transition from traditional society, agricultural society, to sort of first industrial and second industrial revolution, okay? that kind of thing. And this axis shows sort of how far they've gone in what people call the postmodern world, which is the third industrial revolution, is the information society, okay? And some countries up here, Europe, Protestant Europe, some of Catholic Europe, English-speaking countries, U.S. is, where's the U.S. is down, is here, okay? Up in this corner, they've done very well in both. And it seems like, therefore, they have the basis, the tech basis to do pretty well in the energy transition. The countries that did well in one and not the other are going to be challenged in making the energy transitions because of the technological, organizational, economic level of development in the countries. But it's a complex question we'll have to reflect on. Okay, I'm just pointing this out. Take a look at the links. It's actually a really interesting study. So, moving along, let's get into the Energiewende. So here we come up to the current, today's energy transition, 10, 15 years old here in Germany, where it's been probably the most aggressive or progressive, most hard pushed national goals every year, how much more renewables have to be deployed, how much less carbon-based energy, electricity will be produced compared to most countries, and so much money, so much subsidies put into it. I think it's something like 150 billion, if I recall correctly, so far put into the energy transition in Germany, something like that. So huge amount of money. So let's look at what Germany is doing, okay? We will go on then to look, okay, so first we're just going to look overall. That's what this point is here, you see? That's what this point is. What were the plans? Why did they make the plans? And how's it going so far? Kind of an overview, okay? Are they meeting the targets? Is the country meeting the targets? What's happened if they have an Energiewende, which is supposed to transform the source of electricity and energy that's consumed? What about a Transportwende, or a transport revolution that will remove carbon from transport? Well, that's not going so well. It really hasn't really started. Then we'll take a look at this natural gas issue in class 10 and 11 is how I've done it. And that becomes, let's just say, the more renewables you put in, what happens is, because renewables, while they're being installed and they're irregular, sometimes the wind blows and the sun shines and you have plenty or too much, don't know what to do with it. But mostly it's that you don't have enough of it. As that goes up and down, minute by minute it goes up and down, day by day. There might be days when there's hardly any in the middle of the winter, right? Wind or solar. You need something that can come online rapidly in the opposite, that when wind and solar is down, it will come up just as rapidly. And so you maintain a nice steady output for what consumers, business, and people in their homes are demanding, all right? And the only thing that you can ramp up and down like that is natural gas at the present time. And so it turns out natural gas becomes more important, in my view, becomes more important as the energy transition is going on, progresses, as more renewables are installed. And it also becomes geopolitical. Where do you get it from? Well, Europe, mainland Europe, main continent of Europe, and Germany in particular, has almost none of this. So they have to import it from Norway, which are generally not seen as a geopolitical threat, right, to anybody, but also from Russia. And I think you probably know, well, you might not know this, Russia is the biggest exporter of natural gas to the European Union. About 40% of the natural gas here comes from them. It's a huge amount, and it goes, so some people, I think this is reasonable, is that maybe Mr. Putin, the present regime in Russia, might not be reliable when it comes to this. They might choose to use it for geostrategic influence. But meanwhile, those pipelines go through Belarus and go through Ukraine, and I think Belarus and Ukraine have been in the news quite a bit in the last few years. And right now, Belarus trying to people fighting for democracy and against an autocratic government, against corruption. And, Russia invaded Ukraine to keep it from drifting or moving in the revolution in 2014, from moving towards the European Union. So this natural gas that Europe is clearly dependent on, in some sense is becoming more critical because of the change towards renewables, comes from a country that, a regime that can be legitimately considered to be a security risk, and goes through countries that are in the course of democratic upheavals, pro-democratic upheavals. So you could say this is it's a geopolitical issue. Then we'll talk about that too. We'll talk about not only how natural gas is used and the technology and the costs and how it works together with renewables, but we have to deal with the geopolitical question. And how is this going to be resolved? Can Europe get gas from other places? Or maybe they need to go have plenty of nuclear to take its place, but Germany has decided not to have any nuclear. We'll get into all these things, all right? So, in fact, at the bottom there you see there is a class that's going to be on nuclear at the end, and the decision in Germany not to use nuclear, which complicates things. So we talk about the motivations and interests, the rationales for EEG there, stands for Energiewende, for the transition in Germany, and every country's different. There's a Green Party here, there was a Green movement, there's historical reasons why it has the character it has here, as opposed to, in some ways the United States is similar in this regard, but in some ways it's quite different, right? The support for energy transition and environmental questions, right? It's a very polarizing issue in the United States. We talk a little bit about this background. Take a look at this slide if you want. So, the bottom line is, here's the goal of the Energiewende. Most simply, nuclear, coal, oil, and gas out. Now, coal, oil, and gas are clearly fossil fuels, and so they do have to go eventually, as quickly as possible, to reduce carbon emissions that cause global warming. Nuclear does not do that. It does not produce any significant amount of carbon dioxide. So removing that is interesting, to put that on the same level that the country has to get rid of nuclear, put it on the same level as getting rid of carbon. So you've got two goals at the same time that, it's like, you might think of it as declaring war on two things at the same time. Of course, that's controversial. Will you win the Energiewende? Will you win, against fossil fuels and produce a low carbon society, if at the same time you're destroying the nuclear plants that are already installed? And the nuclear plants that are already installed in Germany, they're coming offline by 2022. And if you look at where they were 8-10 years ago, okay, there is as much nuclear non-carbon electricity being produced as basically roughly all the solar and wind that has been put online till now. So a kind of big advance here. What's the net kind of comes out, you're back more or less where you started from. So that is the German model for the energy transition. Is that the model everybody should follow? Will it work in Germany? Well, that's what we're going to look at. And a lot of students write their papers about these kind of things. Okay. So far the whole, and you can see, wind and solar is what everything is supposed to do, 100% renewables. And efficiency, it's clear that wind and solar cannot replace all the things above, nuclear, coal, oil, and gas. It's only going to work if everything is done much more efficiently. Significant cuts in the use of electricity, and how to do that in a modern industrial society and keep prosperity. These are the challenges. Okay. So far, de facto, it's only the electricity that's being transitioned. The transport transition has not really taken place, it's more or less stalled. Now, again, pause it, look closely. The 2016 and 17 data here is what's actually been accomplished, and the other years to the right, 2020, 2030, and so on up to 2050 is the latest goals that have been set. Okay, so you can see if you look on the, well, you take a look, but by 2040, for example, or 2030, there should be at least 55% less greenhouse emissions and so forth. Okay, they're very ambitious goals. How's it going? There's a commission every year that looks at this, and we'll talk about this. Here's one. I used this one for a couple of years ago just because it's simple to look at for now on the screen. And you can see, you go on the right, on the left, final energy productivity, not so good. Heat demand in buildings, not so good. Final energy consumption in transport, that's not going well, and so forth. Gross power consumption, not well. What's going well, and where the targets are likely to be met this year, the 2020 targets, well, actually with COVID, the whole emissions everywhere in the world has gone down. So they might, targets might be met better, but as soon as the economy picks up, it's not a fundamental improvement, right? Okay. But in any case, the commission that looked at this, the government, this is officially from the Energy Ministry, the renewables share in the gross power consumption, they should meet the targets. Renewable share in final energy consumption and heat, that should be met. But, in the end, what is this all about? In the end, you see what I just put there, right? It's about greenhouse gas emissions, and in the end, that target is not expected, is very unlikely. It's basically impossible to meet that target because so many things are red or yellow, okay? And that's the situation, which is, of concern. Now, this is a quick comparison to the United States. I said, and the UK, remember I said before, UK, US, and Germany are basically in the same category as far as percentages and so forth, compared to all other countries. There are differences, but compared to all the other developed countries, more developed countries, they're basically together. And I just find this really interesting. This was a bit of a crisis. That's Germany. I'm sorry, that's the US, the blue. And you can see from 2005, negative inflection means the amount of CO2 being produced, the change since 1999, look at that, it's going down. Well, in the US, we'll find out why it goes down. There's a lot of wind and solar, especially wind being installed, but a lot of switching from coal to natural gas because natural gas is so cheap in the US from fracking. The net output, a lot of people are upset about fracking for various reasons. Is that legitimate or not? We can look at that. The fact is, though, it's actually reduced the CO2 output by replacing coal quite a bit. Whereas, you see Germany is the orange one. From that line over, that bump down in all of them, that's from the economic crisis. But it's basically flat going to the right. We can look at this, look at it here, blown up a little bit. And Germany, kind of after the economic crisis, 2008 and 9, stays pretty flat. And the US is doing somewhat better. Now, why this might be surprising is Germany has an extensive national plan and mandates what needs to be done and big spending on subsidies, and that's the outcome. The United States has none of that. Well, I have tax breaks on production, but and yet, the improvements have this. So this is might be a little bit of a mystery. Some of it we can figure out, but some of it it's not so clear. Why is this? Okay. Let's just say the share in the share of renewable wind and photovoltaic. Photovoltaic is solar electricity. The share together of the renewables is this part here. RES, renewable energy sources, are 29%, 30%, of which a lot is biomass, hydro, and burning waste. So as far as installing photovoltaic, solar, and installing wind, that's about 18% in 2016. It's come up a bit, so that's where it's at. And here's where Germany falls in renewable sources in the EU. Right about there from their program, okay? Again, stop it and stare at it if you want to understand what's being said. This is an interesting thing, which I think is very key to understand here. In the United States, capacity factor for wind, what that means is if you install a windmill, say it's a windmill that should produce, it's a 1 megawatt, and it should, should I say, it could produce 1 megawatt hour, or let's say it could produce 5 megawatt hours, okay, of electricity. But it only produces half of that, so it produces 2.5. So its capacity factor is 0.5. It produced half of what it could produce if the wind blew full strength all the time, see? So in the United States, you can see, let's go back here. The capacity factors in 1990 of the US and Germany were essentially the same. Germany hasn't changed very much all those years. All right. The United States, the capacity factors keep going up. Why? The US is 1.8 times Germany's. That means, essentially, if US installed the same, for every windmill installed in Germany, that same windmill installed in the United States would get 80% more energy coming out of it. Well, that's pretty interesting. And so I'll just say, what I wanted to say here is that understanding this is going to be key in the class to understanding the crisis in German wind. There is a crisis in the wind sector in Germany. The ministry says this to everybody, and I have the feeling that this is a key to understanding it, one of the keys to understanding it, and we'll look at this, okay? The cost of subsidizing renewable energy sources has been going up in Germany, but the rate it's going up, which is this, was slowed down recently by a reform. Basically, less subsidies have meant that customers, consumers, private and businesses, the electric, you can see their electric bill basically is still going up because of renewables, but it's not going up as fast as it was before. So that was a reform. Go ahead here. But because of that reform, there was less incentive to install windmills. So you can see here's how windmills were being installed, and then suddenly, boom, boom, here's when the year 2017 is the year the reform took place. The next year and last year, it's way down. This is a huge crisis. There's been crisis meetings here. The ministry is organized to understand what to do. It's gone down like that, and I would say understanding this, as I said earlier, is a key goal of this course. Right? And okay. Verkehrwende means energy transition. Germany and everybody, the United States, the EU, every country, China, needs an energy transition. Germany is 94% of all transport is based on oil. Transport here is there's more mass transit. There's a real national train system. It's quite nice, but it hasn't expanded for years and years. It's sort of the same percentage forever, while cars and trucks, more and more miles, more and more passengers. But compared to the United States, there is much more, and some other European countries, there's much more well-organized mass transit, intercity mass transit, okay, passenger trains and so forth. However, even in Germany, 94% of everything is based on oil. So that's a real challenge. And you saw on some of the early slides how much of global carbon emissions it comes from that. The United States is like 95 or so. So this is something we'll have one session on. How can this be advanced? And there's issues of biofuels, there's issues of hydrogen, issues of electric cars, and we'll get into that. Tesla is opening a factory here just outside Berlin, big manufacturing center for Tesla. We'll see how that goes. We'll talk about these things. 2 more sessions. I won't go into it all now. As I said before, I already explained the one on top here. The Energiewende, it's natural gas and geopolitics. We'll talk about this. we'll talk about the technical issues in gas 1 week, and then the next week, how you use gas to generate electricity, how it compares to coal, which is much better than coal as far as produces a lot less carbon, nowhere near as good as renewables, but is it a bridge in between? That kind of thing, right? But the next week we'll talk about the geopolitical issues, which are hot issues here right now in Germany. Now there's demands for sanctions, more sanctions on Germany, and not building a pipeline from Russia to bring more natural gas here. So these are important issues. And lastly, nuclear, the exit. This is a law in Germany now. It's a decision. They must close, all nuclear power plants must be closed and taken apart, even though some of them could run for 10, 20, 30 more years. But they're being taken apart. And that was a decision after Fukushima. But there's a long history of an anti-nuclear movement. We'll talk about that long history, which has similarities to the US and other countries, but also is quite different. And we want to learn about it. And what will that mean? Was it really a safety issue? Is it possible to make an energy transition without nuclear power, big nuclear power plants, or even small nuclear power plants? It's a legitimate question. Poland thinks not. They said if Germany's having such troubles with wind and solar and it's so expensive, how can Poland, with a very challenged national grid that's left over from Soviet times, and with much less income per capita, much less industrial base, how are they going to have 100% renewables, wind and solar? Maybe if they want to get rid of those coal plants, maybe they have to build nuclear plants, and they're planning to build like 6 or 9 nuclear plants in the next 20-something years. But Germany going the opposite direction. That's interesting, right? So we have to talk about that. So there you go. That's class 10 and 11. That'll be class 12. And hope to see you in Energizing Europe next semester. I'm Dr. Tom O'Donnell. Thanks for your interest. I hope it was interesting. Or I hope I whet your appetite. Put it that way. I can't teach you stuff here in this quick, but just give you an idea of what you might learn and the questions we'll deal with. And I'm happy to have you write to me. There's my email address. It's a University of Michigan email address. I was there for many years. I got my PhD, my master's degree, and so forth there. My undergrad degree, too, as a nuclear physicist. And I also taught there in energy and international relations, and my website and so forth. So check it out. And I hope to see you and be able to say, Willkommen in Berlin. Next semester, the semester after. Keep safe. And thanks for listening. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this week's lecture. You can find the dates and descriptions for all sessions in our digital lecture series, as well as information about our instructors and their courses on our website. Also, connect with us on social media and attend one of our informational webinars. Thank you very much for watching, and we hope to see you again soon, online or on site in Berlin.